There is no correlation between the duty of man and whether he is blessed or cursed. Duty is what man ought to fulfill. It is his heaven-sent vocation, and should not depend on recompense, conditions, or reason. Only then is he doing his duty. To be blessed is when someone is made perfect and enjoys God's blessing after experiencing judgment. To be cursed is when someone's disposition does not change after they have experienced chastisement and judgment. It is when they do not experience being made perfect but are punished. But regardless of whether they are blessed or cursed, created beings should fulfill their duty, doing what they ought to do and doing what they are able to do. This is the very least that a person who pursues God should do. You should not do your duty only to be blessed, and you should not refuse to act for fear of being cursed. Let me tell you this one thing. Man's performance of his duty is what he ought to do, and if he is incapable of performing his duty, then this is due to his rebelliousness.
Amen.
I'd like to share how I experienced these words.
Great.
Once I became a believer, I noticed those who were church leaders who would often hold fellowships on the truth. Some had duties that required skills like making videos or singing. I admired them. Their duties seemed important, so I looked up to them. As for those who managed church affairs, those duties weren't prized. Because of this, I thought that they'd never make a name for themselves. I resolved that I would secure a duty that would make me look good. 2 years later, given the writing duty, I was so happy, because every time I went to the church for work, everyone would look at me with such deep admiration. I was truly pleased with myself. I believed writing garnered more admiration than other duties. Then in 2018, I was relocated. While there, one brother found out what my duty was and started chatting with me about it. It made me really happy to see how he looked up to me. I felt that having that duty was a real honor. Back then, I was so full of smugness and self-admiration. I was vying for name and gain in duty. Soon after, I was dismissed due to my poor performance. That left me feeling negative and really upset. The leader fellowshiped with me and said, "God's house needs stagehands for our films. This is something you could do well. Whatever your duty, you must pursue the truth and put your all into doing it well."
Yes.
I didn't know what that duty entailed, but I figured I should just accept it since the leader arranged it. I soon realized that being a stagehand was hard work. I had to move heavy props around. It was very physical. Skills weren't involved, just lots of legwork. I thought, writing had required me to use my brain. It was more dignified. Moving set pieces is physical labor. It's dirty. Will the others look down on me? This thought made my heart sink, and I was resistant to this duty. From that point on, I worked half-heartedly and shirked it when I could. If we didn't have a prop, and we had to borrow it, I would have someone else go ask. I feared that if I asked, those who knew me would discover that I had been dismissed from my previous duty and was now doing set work. Then what would they think of me? I didn't want to learn the relevant skills. I feared learning more would lock me into that duty, and then I'd never stand out. Sometimes on set, I'd be asked to set props in specific ways. This always made me feel extremely uncomfortable. It was an embarrassment. I recalled how when I did writing duty, people had followed my instructions. Now I was being told what to do. What a demotion. One time, a brother asked me to pick up some rice straw for the set. I didn't want to. I thought doing that would be embarrassing. If brothers and sisters saw, they'd think me a lost cause for doing that at such a young age. But since it was my duty, I waited till no one was around, and then I snuck out to do it. While I gathered it, A brother was heading my way. He was wearing leather shoes and white socks. He was so clean. I looked at myself, dirty head to toe. I suddenly felt so dejected, so upset, thinking, we're the same age, but he's been given an honorable duty, while my duty is to pick rice straw. What a huge gap between us. How embarrassing. I'll go tell the leader I don't want this duty, and ask him for something else. When I got back, I felt really conflicted, wondering if I should speak. If I didn't, I'd have to keep doing that duty. But if I said I no longer wanted to do it, I was quitting my duty.
That's right.
At this point, I suppressed my feelings. Not long after, stagehands and performers were to start attending gatherings together. I didn't like this. They could gain praise. They could bask in the spotlight. I was doing menial labor. We weren't on the same level. Wouldn't being together highlight my inferiority? Everyone engaged in fellowship and gatherings, but I refused to share. When gathering with the performers, I felt my only purpose was to make them look good. It was depressing. As time went on, darkness grew within me, and I want to stop gathering. I often reminisced about my time doing the writing, when I was greeted enthusiastically and was valued. Since I was dismissed, I'd just been doing odd jobs. No one looked up to me. I was so miserable, dejected. I felt increasingly antisocial. I was melancholy. I was not myself. I quickly lost a great deal of weight. One evening, as I was walking alone, I couldn't hold back my misery. Crying, I prayed to God. Oh God, in the past, I resolved to seek truth and fulfill my duties. But right now, there's no way for me to gain praise in my duty. I always feel inferior. I feel so negative and so weak. I fear I'm on the verge of betraying you. Dear God, I don't want to be negative, but I don't know what to do. Please guide me, so I'll no longer be this way.
Amen.
After that, I read this in God's words. How does duty come into being? To speak broadly, it comes into being as a result of God's management work of bringing salvation to humanity. To speak specifically, as God's management work unfolds amongst mankind, various tasks arise that need to be done, and they require people to cooperate and complete them. This has given rise to responsibilities and missions for people to fulfill. And these responsibilities and missions are the duties God bestows on mankind.
Amen.
Whatever your duty, do not discriminate between high and low. Suppose you say, though this task is a commission from God and the work of God's house, if I do it, people might look down on me. Others get to do work that lets them stand out. How can this task I've been given, which doesn't let me stand out but makes me exert myself behind the scenes, be called a duty? This is a duty I cannot accept. This is not my duty. My duty has to be one that makes me stand out in front of others and allows me to make a name for myself. And even if I don't make a name for myself or stand out, I still have to benefit from it and feel physically at ease. Is this an acceptable attitude? Being picky is not accepting what comes from God. It is making choices according to your own preferences. This is not accepting your duty. It is a refusal of your duty. As soon as you try to pick and choose, you are no longer capable of true acceptance. Such pickiness is adulterated with your individual preferences and desires. When you give consideration to your own benefit, your reputation, and so on, your attitude toward your duty is not submissive. Here is the attitude toward duty. First, you may not analyze it, nor think about who has assigned it to you. Instead, you should accept it from God as your duty and as what you should do. Second, do not discriminate between high and low, and do not concern yourself with its nature. Whether it is done in front of people or out of their sight, whether it lets you stand out or not, do not consider these things. These are the two features of the attitude with which people should approach their duty.
Amen. is so true.
Reading this showed me that my attitude toward my duty was wrong. God has requirements of us. We should accept the duties we're given.
That's right.
We're not meant to have a choice.
True.
I let my desires get in the way. I wanted a duty that brought admiration. I both opposed and rejected anything behind the scenes. I did not submit to God's rule. I was very slipshod, and in truth, I was opposing God. I recalled when my faith began, I envied the leaders and the brothers and sisters who performed. I thought those duties carried weight and inspired admiration, and that people given duties requiring physical work had no real skills. I thought those duties were lowly and not respected. Since my thinking was misguided, I had categorized duties. So when I started as a stagehand, to my mind, I was just doing menial work, and so I feared that it would damage my reputation. This way of thinking made me resistant. I didn't take my duties seriously, and didn't try to learn the requisite skills. I even thought about quitting my duty. I saw that I only cared about my own likings, and I thought only of my own interests and prestige. I lacked true obedience. I was ignoring God's will by shirking my duties. My attitude was disgusting. It was so repulsive to God. Realizing all of this made me despise myself. Soon after, I read these words of God. Humans are created beings. What are the functions of created beings? This touches upon people's practice and duties. You are a created being. God has granted you the gift of song. When He uses you to sing, what should you do? You should accept this task that God has entrusted to you and sing well. When God uses you to spread the gospel, what as a created being do you become? You become an evangelist. When He needs you to lead, you should take up this commission. If you can fulfill this duty in accordance with the principles of truth, then this will be another function you serve. Some people neither understand the truth nor pursue it. They can merely exert effort. So what is the function of those created beings? It is to exert effort and render service.
Amen.
From God's words, I learned that any duty one does in God's house, whether or not it seems important, they're just different kinds of duties. One's obligation remains the same. One's inherent identity doesn't change. We're always created beings.
Yes.
I was a created being in my writing duty, just as I was in my stagehand duty. In God's house, there's no hierarchy of duties. It is arranged by need, and according to each individual's stature and strengths. No matter the duty, God's will is for us to truly put our all into our duties, to always seek and pursue truth, to resolve our corruptions and do our duties.
Amen.
As God's words say,
The functions are not the same. There is one body.
each does his duty, each in his place and doing his very best. For each spark there is one flash of light, and seeking maturity in life, thus will I be satisfied.
Amen.
The church leader gave me stagehand duty because that's what was needed. I should not be choosy based on my desires. I should submit to God's rule. I should set the props as needed for each program, and do my bit for each show bearing witness to God. This was my function.
Amen.
My perspective changed once I understood God's will. What was once a burden for me was gone.
Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God.
I could do my duty correctly. From that time on, I began to diligently work on improving all my skills. And in our gatherings with the performers, I stopped comparing duties, and instead I opened up and spoke about my problems. I fellowshipped all I understood.
Great.
There were still times after that when I feared being looked down upon, and I realized I was comparing duties again. So I'd quickly pray to God and stop thinking like that. Instead, I focused on my duty and pleasing God.
Amen.
After doing this for a while, I began to feel more relaxed. I no longer felt that working on sets was a lowly duty, and instead I felt it's a commission from God. I was honored to do this duty, and proud to do my part on the films that came from God's house.
Thanks be to God.
That's great.
I thought I'd gained some stature after that experience. That I could accept whatever duty God gave me, without being negative and thinking that my duty was beneath me. But the very next time that I was tested, the issue reappeared. It was during the busy season for farmers. Some brethren were out spreading the gospel and couldn't come back in time for the harvest. So the leader asked me if I could help them with their farm work. I thought, this could help put their minds at ease while they spread the gospel, and aid the work of God's house, so I should take this on.
Right.
But then when I arrived, I noticed that the other brothers were far older than me. No one else was in their 20s. I wasn't too pleased. Just then, a brother came over and he asked me, "Brother, how do you have time to work here? Aren't you still writing?" As you can guess, I was mortified. I said, "This is just temporary." After he walked away, I thought, just what will he think of me? Will he conclude that my doing this work at a young age means I don't have real talent? That the reason I'm here is it's all I can do? What a demotion. I was filled with resentment. Though I was physically doing the work, my mind was preoccupied by the brothers and what they thought. Did they look down on me? Distraught, I muddled my way through the work. When I got home, I saw other brothers doing their work on computers, and I felt like I was on a lower rung. I thought, their duties are better than mine. Why do I have to work in the fields? Not to mention, I attended university. And I earned good grades. Wasn't that to escape the farmer's fate of working in the fields all day? I won't return. I knew I shouldn't be thinking that way, but I felt deeply wronged. Thinking assigning me to work in the fields wasted my talent and disgraced me. I became more distraught, so I prayed to God. Dear God, I keep thinking that work in the fields is seen as inferior and disgraceful. I want to quit. I know my thinking is wrong, but I can't help it. I'm really miserable. May you please guide me so I understand your will and obey.
Amen.
After my prayer, I read this in God's words. What is true submission? Whenever God does something that goes your way, and you feel that everything is satisfactory and proper, and you have been allowed to stand out, you feel this is quite glorious, and you say thank God and can submit to his orchestration and arrangements. However, when you are assigned to an unremarkable place, where you are never able to stand out and in which no one ever acknowledges you, then you stop feeling happy and find it difficult to submit. Submitting while conditions are favorable is usually easy. If you can also submit in adverse circumstances, those in which things do not go your way and your feelings get hurt, that make you weak, that make you suffer physically and take a blow to your reputation, that cannot satisfy your vanity and pride, and that make you suffer psychologically, then you truly have stature. Is this not the goal you should be pursuing? If you have such a resolution, such a goal, then there is hope.
Amen.
I felt so ashamed as I considered God's words. They had revealed my inner state to a T. When I believed that I could show off, while assigned to writing duty, I performed my work with enthusiasm and was happy to submit. However, when I was helping out in the fields, and my vanity was impacted, I became upset and willful. It grew worse when I saw others working on computers. I felt I wasn't as good as them. I lost my equilibrium. I thought that since I was educated, I should be doing a dignified duty that requires skills. So I resisted and I complained. I wanted to quit farm work. I didn't consider what would benefit God's house or God's will. Instead, I was consumed by vanity. I was horribly selfish. I wasn't seeing myself as a member of God's house. A sincere believer who cares for God's will perceives their duty as a great responsibility, and so pitches in however needed, even if it's difficult or goes against their interests. So long as it benefits the church, they'll do whatever it takes. Only people like that truly stand with God's house.
Amen.
I thought about harvest and my attitude. Some of my brothers and sisters needed help. There were other people who could have assisted them. So then why did God appoint this duty to me? It's not like I was an asset for that work. God was exposing my attitude toward duty by having me perform such work. He did this so that I could recognize my corruption and impurities and strive to resolve my corruption with truth.
Amen.
But I didn't grasp God's kind intentions. I was still selfish in my duty, thinking of my own preferences. I couldn't submit to God's plan. I was rebellious and resisted. I really hurt his heart. I grasped that the will of God was to expose and cleanse my corrupt disposition and correct my attitude toward duty. This was God's love.
Amen.
It doesn't matter if I'm assigned to menial or unimpressive work. If it benefits the church's work, then I should accept it unconditionally, submit, and give it my all. Only this is acceptable.
Amen.
Once I understood this, I gained a true sense of calm. In time, I reflected on myself. When I was asked to perform an unremarkable duty, why was I so resistant? Why wasn't I able to submit? In my seeking of answers, I read these words from God. Satan corrupts people through the education and influence of the national governments and the famous and great. Their nonsense has become man's life and nature. Everyone for himself and the devil take the hindmost is a well-known satanic saying that has been instilled into everyone and has become people's lives. There are other words of philosophy for living that are also like this. Satan uses each nation's fine traditional culture to educate people, causing humanity to fall into and be engulfed in a boundless abyss of destruction. And in the end, people are destroyed by God because they serve Satan and resist God. There are still many satanic poisons in people's lives, in their conduct and dealings with others. They practically do not even possess a shred of the truth. For example, their philosophies for living, their ways of doing things, and their maxims are all filled with the poisons of the great red dragon, and they all come from Satan. Thus, all things that flow through people's bones and blood are all things of Satan.
Amen.
God's words helped me to grasp that I was disobedient and picky about my duty, because I'd been indoctrinated by Satan's corrosive sayings like, "Those with brains rule those with brawn," and "every man for himself." Also, only the wisest or most foolish don't change, and so I had been looking to stand out. Throughout my time in school, my teachers and parents always said I needed to work hard so that I could get into a good university, escape the bleak life of a farmer, and get ahead. Therefore, I studied hard my whole life, hoping I could get a good degree and find a respectable job, as a supervisor or manager, something prestigious. After becoming a believer, I judged the duties in God's house with the eyes of a non-believer, and continued to rank duties as high or low. Being a leader or skill-based worker seemed respectable. Others would look up to me. But if I instead worked behind the scenes, performing menial physical duties, they'd look down on me. I saw that these satanic poisons had seeped into my nature, dominating my thoughts, pushing me to willfully pursue name, to seek status. When my prestige and status were threatened, I became resistant. I couldn't accept my place and do my duty as a created being. I lacked all reason. If I continued on this satanic path, refusing truth and resisting my duty from God, I'd never gain truth nor life, and God would eliminate me. Once I grasped this, I became resolved to satisfy God. I wanted to forsake Satan's poisons. The next day, I returned to the fields.
Thanks be to God. Thanks be to God.
Thank God.
I've since read some words from God. Shall we read them?
Yes. I decide the destination of each person not on the basis of age, seniority, amount of suffering, and, least of all, the degree to which they invite pity, but according to whether they possess the truth. There is no other choice but this. Ultimately, whether or not people can attain salvation is not dependent on what duty they fulfill, but on whether they have understood and gained the truth, and on whether or not they can submit to God's orchestrations and be a genuine created being. God is righteous, and this is the principle by which he measures all mankind. This principle is immutable, and you must remember this. Do not think, therefore, about finding some other path, and do not try to adapt this principle according to circumstance. The moment you do, you will have committed a foolish, ignorant act. God is not flexible when it comes to this issue, and the standards he requires of all who attain salvation are unchanging. They remain the same no matter who you are. Amen.
Within his words lies God's righteous disposition. God doesn't determine one's outcome based on what duty they perform, how much they've worked, or how much they've contributed. He sees whether they can submit to his rule and do a created being's duty, whether they can gain the truth and change their disposition.
Yes.
If I do not pursue the truth, then no matter how impressive my duty might seem to others, I'd never gain truth, much less God's approval and salvation.
Yes.
I thought of an antichrist that our church had expelled. She had performed important duties, was a leader, and some new church members thought much of her. But she didn't pursue the truth, nor did she try to transform her disposition. Instead, she sought status and took the Antichrist's path. She disrupted the work of God's house, so she was kicked out. I also saw some who perform ordinary duties. Their duties didn't seem like anything so special, yet they always performed them without any complaints. And when they ran into problems, they'd seek the truth. They had the Holy Spirit's enlightenment, so their work improved. They lived out a human likeness.
Thanks be to God.
This showed me gaining the truth has nothing to do with what someone's duty is. Regardless of one's duty, dispositional change and seeking truth are key.
That's true.
That's the only path.
Amen.
Whether the leader makes me stagehand or makes me farmhand, it's all arranged by God and what I need for my life entry. So I should always embrace it. In my duty, I should seek truth, practice God's words, and let truth guide me. Only that aligns with God's will.
Amen.
Grasping this gave me a sense of freedom. Later, the leader assigned me to more commonplace duties, which I accepted. I even offered to help others with housework in my free time.
Thanks be to God.
When I practiced that way, I found that whether I was helping with cleaning, planting trees, or digging a ditch, there was a lesson to learn.
Thanks be to God.
God isn't biased against physical labor. If I put my heart into it and sought the truth and practiced God's words, I could reap a harvest.
Amen.
True.
After all this, I truly realized that whatever my duty, it was what God had arranged and what I needed for life entry. I should always accept it and obey, and fulfill all my duties. Throughout the process, I should seek the truth and dispositional change.
Amen.
Even though I had misguidedly ranked different duties and had resisted duties that I didn't like and was in opposition to God, He didn't treat me based on my transgressions, but guided me step by step with His words, helping me grasp truth and grasp a created being's mission.
Amen.
He shifted my false notions so I'd embrace my duty and begin to obey him. That's God's love.
Thanks be to God.
To God.
Thanks be to God.
Thanks be to God.